All right, so welcome, angels, to Wine 101. I'm joined tonight by some of your favorite winemakers. Sorry, by the way, I'm Johan. I'm head of wine at Naked Wines, or wine head, or whatever you want to call me is fine. You won't be hearing that much from me tonight. There's a few people in the room that know a lot more about wine than I do, so we're going to let them do the talking. And I'm also joined co-hosting by Lulu. So Lulu and I will field some of your questions and we'll guide you through this fun session. So we're just going to have a look at really about basics about tasting wine, storing wine, cellaring wine in a normal, naked, non-snobby way. So anyway, I'll introduce just who's with me tonight as they appear on my screen. I have Adrian Rebecca Santolin from Boy Meets Girl and Santolin Wines. I'm sure you are well familiar with Adrian and Rebecca. We are joined by Rob Palazzo in the middle of my screen. And we have also Amy and Adam Barton. It's only Adam at the moment. Amy is there in the empty chair, and she will be back momentarily. Down in my left corner from WA, we have Brian Fletcher.
Hi, everybody.
Drinking something delicious there, I think.
Yes.
And in the middle bottom of my screen is Sam Plunkett, who has the best background of the night for sure.
Hey guys.
Hi, Sam.
Oh, there's Amy. Hi, Amy.
Hi. Very legit, Sam.
And last but not least, we have John Colvin joining us from the Hunter Valley, at least the backgrounds from the Hunter Valley. So that's what we'll imagine. We might be joined by Rod Easthope from New Zealand as well, although it is quite late over there. So we'll see if Rod pops in throughout the session. Anyway, so I'm going to kick over initially to Rob Palazzo, so who can tell us a bit more about himself for the angels who don't know his backstory. And Rob will also talk a little bit about cool and warm climate wines. What is the difference between growing in cool versus warm climate wine regions, and also touch on how to read a wine list and get the most out of that. So Rob, I'll kick over to you.
Thank you, Johan. Good evening, angels. Great to be here. As mentioned, my name is Rob Palazzo. I've been a winemaker here on Naked Wines for 7 years now. God, that time has flown. So I've been able to establish my brand, R Palazzo Wines, which is here on Naked. I'm based in the Riverina region of southern New South Wales. Prior to establishing R Palazzo Wines here with Naked Wines, I was a senior winemaker at McWilliams Wines. Prior to that, I worked for Orlando, and I've also worked extensively overseas doing 4 vintages in Burgundy, vintage in Tuscany, Napa Valley, the Niagara Peninsula in Canada, and also Marlborough in New Zealand. As I said, I'm based in the Riverina, but I also source fruit from not only the Riverina region, but also Tumbarumba, the Hilltops, Canberra District, and Orange in New South Wales. So after rattling off those wine regions, that's a pretty good segue to my first topic that I'll talk to you about, and that's wine regions of Australia. So I guess broadly, every state in Australia produces wine, which is amazing. So Australia's home to some of the oldest grapevines in the world. There's around over 60 different wine regions in Australia, and in those 60 plus wine regions, they produce over 100 different varietals. So just to put it in perspective on how, I guess, broad and diverse the Australian wine industries are, if you put a map of Australia on top of Europe, you'd probably start in the UK and end up somewhere on the eastern side of Russia. So if you imagine all the old world regions in France and Italy and Germany, and not to mention Spain and places like that, and how diverse those wine regions are, and think about how big Australia is, it just goes to show the diversity of regions that we have here as well. So with regards to those regions, probably the major differences are climate, topography, and also soil type. So probably the most basic one is climate. So that's what I'm talk to you mostly about tonight. And so bundling Australian wine regions, you could probably put them in two camps, and that'd be warm climate and cool climate. So as the name suggests, it's pretty basic. So warmer climate regions have, a higher average temperature than cooler climate regions. So, but of course, with regards to that, vintage is always something that plays a really big part. So it's also, it can happen where a warmer region has unseasonably cooler weather, and vice versa, where a cooler region can have a slightly warmer year. So with regards to that, probably the major differences between warm and cooler climates, if I just want to strip it right back and simplify it. So with warmer climates, you're probably going to get more riper fruit flavors and generally lower acids. In cooler climates, you'll get generally a different spectrum of fruit flavors. So with the riper flavors that you get from warmer climates, if we use, say, Shiraz as an example, you may get fruits in more of a darker, blacker spectrum, whereas in a cooler climate, those fruits may be in more of a red cherry type spectrum. With regards to whites, if we're looking at Chardonnay in a warmer region, you may get more melon type characters. In a cool region, you may be looking at more, say, your white peach type characters. And also generally in cooler climates, you have generally a higher natural acidity. So that's all great in theory, but what does that mean in practice? So glad you asked. In everybody's hot little hands, if you're tasting wines, you should have or potentially have a glass of my 2021 New South Wales Pinot Grigio. So what this wine is, it's a great example of the different characteristics of warm and cool climate wines produced from grapes in warmer and cooler climates, and how those flavors can come together in one particular glass and how they differ. So to break it all down, so have a sip. To break it all down for you, I'll just run you through it quickly. So this particular wine is a blend of regions across southern New South Wales. 60% of this wine is made from fruit grown in the Riverina, where I'm based. So that's known as a warm climate. So the fruit aspects of that particular portion of the wine gives the wine its core of fruit. So that intense sort of pear character and those lovely sort of, orange blossom notes that you'll get on the nose as well. 30% of this wine comes from a region called Tumbarumba, which is the foot of Snowy Mountains. So that's a cool climate region in southern New South Wales. So what that particular portion for the wine adds is that lovely, fresh, crisp, natural acid backbone. So it really gives that wine that real nice freshness. The remaining 10% of this wine is from the cool climate, high altitude region of Orange. And so what that portion does and what that adds to this particular wine is that lovely sort of mid-palate hint of texture and weight. So I guess that sort of gives you a bit of an example of the different characteristics from warm and cool climate all coming together in the one wine to make a balanced, complex, and also nice and elegant wine. The second topic I'm going to talk to you about quickly is navigating a wine list, which is kind of topical for some people, especially if you're in Sydney and coming into some freedom next week, and also you guys in Melbourne as well. Fingers crossed, some freedom for you guys too. So I think everyone in the country can sort of relate to wanting to get back into a restaurant. So often the best way, or it's often something that I get asked a bit, what varieties should I look out for? What names should I look out for on a wine list? So I guess the first thing to understand is a wine list is your friend when you go to the restaurant, but I can understand how it can be daunting, especially when you pick one up and there's about 500 different wines in there. So I'm basically going to split this into 3 really easy tips for you. So the next time you go to a wine list, you can feel confident in having a look at it. And basically what this does is just simplify the whole process. So the first option is if you're someone who goes into a restaurant, checks out a wine list, and you know what you want to drink. For example, if you're normally a Pinot Grigio drinker, for example, and you want to go into a restaurant and you want to drink Pinot Grigio, then say you normally drink, say, New South Wales Pinot Grigio, then you might want to go into a restaurant and say, I want to try something from WA or maybe even Vic. That's a really good way to just cut straight in. Maybe if it's a 500 wine list, you've probably stripped it back to half a dozen wines, maybe even 2 or 3 at that point. So that's a really simple way to cut through the noise and get there quickly through something that you're just familiar with and just want to drink what you normally enjoy. The second one is if you don't know what you want. So the best starting point with something like that is to look for something familiar. So that may not be a particular wine that you've had before, but something else like a producer, so a winery that you've known and drunk the wine of before, or a varietal. So say, for instance, you've drunk Cabernet a few times and you quite enjoy Cabernet, and that may be something that you look at as well. So what that does is that just uses your experience of familiarity to help you sort of cut through as well and make a bit of an educated guess. Because again, with a whole heap of wines that you maybe may or do not know, that can be quite daunting. Now, the last one is if you're completely going out on a whim and you're just winging it, you don't know what you want to drink, and you're just gonna go in there, you're just gonna go for it. The best thing to do, have a chat to the sommelier. It's their job. They know a lot about the wine. They would have put the wine list together, so they can certainly help you. You can either ask them to say, hey, what do you recommend? That kind of thing. That's great. But there's also the possibility that what he likes may not be what you normally like. And also it could be expensive because he might just choose something that he really likes. So my advice would be to go to the sommelier and just sort of break it down, give him some parameters and say, look, I normally drink, say, crisp aromatic whites, and I want to spend about, say, $50. And that'll give them some parameters to help go away and find you something. And they might even give you a bit of a taste to help you sample a few things. Now, the bit about price is something that people always get iffy on, but I'd certainly go in and don't be afraid to sort of let them know how much you want to spend. I mean, sticking to a budget, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think where a lot of people get into trouble is where they try and choose a wine purely based on the numbers. So that's it. They're my tips on how to navigate a wine list. So I hope you find those helpful, and thanks for listening, and thank you for supporting my wines on Naked, and over to the other great winemakers.
Thank you so much, Rob. Well, I think, we've all saved quite a bit of money over the past 18 months, not buying wine in restaurants. So I hope you all have treated yourself to some seriously good wines at home. I know I certainly have spent a little bit more on what I'm drinking at home when you don't have to spend $70, $80 a bottle in a restaurant. So definitely looking forward to going out again, though, however.
We had a couple of good questions that I would like to bring in. One was from our angel Malcolm, who asked if that you didn't have access to fruit from various climates to pull together a balanced wine. Can you pick the fruit earlier in a warm climate to keep the acid up, or does that end up with grapes that aren't ripe and flavors that aren't very nice?
Yeah, like that certainly can happen. There's often things that you could do in a warmer climate to, maybe get a small amount of fruit of a particular block or something and pick that super early to retain the acidity. But also what you'll get there is it's a real balancing act, because there will be those flavors you'll be getting unripe flavors in the wine. So that's always, you just don't have the control there. So, Adrian and Rebecca are going to talk quite a bit about blending a bit later. So that's, so I'm not going to try and steal their thunder there, but certainly, certainly the aspect and the main part with any sort of blending, and that relates certainly to blending within regions, is sort of getting the main aspects and the best aspects of all those particular regions and the components, and making ultimately a much better wine in the end. So that's the aim.
And we did a poll while you were talking about whether or not people feel confident ordering off a wine list, which resulted in about 50-50 people feel not very confident at all. One of our angels asked, is it true that the second on the wine list, is usually the cheapest wine but has the biggest markup?
No, yeah, look, there's a few of those myths going around. I don't particularly think that's the case. Like I said, I don't think that's the case. I think that's probably a bit of an old wives' tale, to be honest. Like I said, I think I said it at the end. I think if you're choosing wines purely based on the numbers or trying to do like that, that's where you run into trouble. So, like I said, if that's something that you're concerned about, the price, whichever one's the best value or something like that. Like I said, if you've got a budget, there's nothing wrong. Like, stick to it. There's nothing wrong with sticking to a budget. That's the wise thing to do. It's when you go in there and fly blind and buy purely on those numbers, is you're probably going to get something that you don't really enjoy.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, great questions. We will move on though, because we've got quite a few topics to cover. So we'll kick over to Sam Plunkett in his beautiful winery, who will talk to us a little bit about rosé. Rosés enjoyed tremendous growth in Australia in the past few years. More and more people really enjoying, obviously, that balance, between red and white, and just a really intense, beautiful, crunchy fruit flavors you get in rosé. So Sam makes one of our most popular rosés. So he will talk about rosé and also a little bit about tasting wine, which he is intimately familiar with. So Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Johan. Hey, I might just start with Angels. Thank you so much. The Naked Wine's been just a terrific experience for myself and my family. Rough and tumble thing happened in my winemaking world about a decade ago. Actually, I've been making wine all my working life in central Victoria. And at that time, Naked Wines was just in the UK. Anyway, Eamon Fitzgerald, heading up that business, rang, Sam, I think we can help you keep making wine. And that gave me the confidence to say yes to other opportunities, neighbours offering us space for tanks they hadn't used for a number of years, and then growers offering us fruit and suppliers offering me a loan of equipment. But knowing Naked Wines was sitting in the background, let me say yes. And I reckon just a cool snippet to give you some insight. That was 2012 vintage, and we got fruit off a vineyard called Gentle Annie. And actually other people might talk more about this later, but red wine, thick skins, the precious stuff is in the skins. And this red wine had a massive cap of skins, which I couldn't punch down. So this, I thought, really high quality fruit. I sent a little video to Aim and said if I could have some money to buy barrels, because I didn't have any money. And I think I could make something pretty smart. So Naked Wines was actually trying to send us $70,000 before I had a bank account open. We bought 26 new barrels, paid myself $1,000 a tonne to make the wine, paid the grower $1,000 a tonne for fruit. And that was the first fine wine Naked Wines in the UK made. And at the time, I was working out of a corner of a borrowed winery, driving around in an unroadworthy ute. And these days, we're able to buy an old factory in Seymour and turn it into a winery. And we employ about a dozen people. So Naked Wines, you support at least a dozen mortgages. So thank you. So rosé, it is really very fashionable, and maybe the celebrity rosés point to that. So Brad Pitt and Angelina and Kylie Minogue, who I'd love to invite to my birthday one day, and Cameron Diaz, they're all doing celebrity rosés. And as an aside, he doesn't know it yet, but one day I'm going to do a celebrity wine with Eric Bana, and it's going to be a big, rich Shiraz, crafted to drink at a barbecue while you talk with your buddies about cars. So if anyone knows Eric Bana, if you can help with the hookup there. In Australia, rosé is, I'll say it's emerging as a popular thing. I had a look at some statistics. It's maybe 5% of what I drink. But in France, how staggering is this? There's more rosé bought and consumed in France than there is white wine. So it's about 30% of what France drinks. So I think what's happening in Australia is big news in a global context where we can be drinking a lot more rosé. And in fact, in France, there's some regions where the only thing they're allowed to make is rosé. Like, so they'll... And Rob, I was thinking about Rob, when Rob was talking about climate, rosé is interesting because you can grow it you can make it in the very coolest regions in Champagne. Sparkling Champagne rosé is a big thing. Actually, in Provence, the kind of famous French region, it's hot and dry and sunny. In California, they make masses of white Zinfandel, which think of it as, anyway, it's rosé. And in cool Tassie, you can make rosé. In Central Victoria, anyway, it's really versatile. And actually, I think that's one of the, in the same way that it's versatile where it grows, it's versatile how you drink it. So drink it in the sun, drink it with food. And so to talk about how it's made, I probably got to cheat with some props. So these are actually blueberries, but that is about the size of a wine grape. Anyway, wine grapes are small. And Brian Fletcher, he probably uses grapes like this to make wine. Does a stir. Fletcher, if you're able to jump in. So yeah, these are grapes I got from the supermarket. It's the wrong time of year for wine grapes. They're actually at our place, they're just tiny little leaves, and it'll be March before we're picking grapes. Anyway, if you squeeze a white grape, as you can imagine, the juice is clear. And I wish I could do it as a quick poll, but if you can answer yourself, if you squeeze a red berry, what color do you reckon the juice will be? Because you'd think it would be red, but well, these supermarket grapes, not so easy to get juice out of. But again, red grapes, clear like water. So rosé, it's all about the skins, because it's the skins that have the pigment, the anthocyanin. So we pick the grapes, and sometimes we, as the grapes are going into the crusher, we can drain juice off. So it's had very little contact with the skins. We call that saigner, or to bleed off. Or if I spin this around, can you see the press without breaking anything? So that machine there, that's a grape press. And we can put sorry, I'm on a pallet. Things might fall off. Put the red grapes in, and I give it a squeeze. Actually, we might leave it 6 hours, might even leave it a day, and there'll be pigment move from the skins into the juice. And whereas if we're making red wine, that tank immediately behind me is a red fermenter. The skins and pips and juice, it's all in for a couple of weeks. So we extract all the color. So yeah, rosé, it's about getting the color from the skins, and it's actually about limiting the amount of time that the skins are in contact with the juice. And I'm at risk of blowing over the time limit. But there's kind of interesting arms race to make the paler rosé. So rosés, I reckon, even a few years ago, actually I was making deeper coloured rosé for Naked Wines 4 or 5 years ago. And if Provence is kind of the poster child of rosé, this is kind of what Provence rosé would have looked like a few years ago, but now they're just getting paler and paler and almost looking like white wine. Hey, Johan, jump in if you think I should be talking more about rosé, or will I move to the palate sensations? What do you reckon?
Can I jump in, Sam? One of our angels, JP, asked, are all wine grapes red?
No, but that is a great question. So in the same way that you've got Pink Lady and Red Delicious apples, red skins, and then you've got Granny Smith green skins. So you would break wine grapes up into two, reds and whites, and they actually do. Most of the whites are this kind of color, they're smaller, and most of the reds are this kind of color, and again, they're smaller. There's a couple, Pinot Noir can have a paler color, a white Pinot Gris can have a coppery color. It can almost look like a red. No, so yes, some are white and some are red. And you can absolutely make white wine from every red grape, but you cannot make red wine from white grapes.
Yes, makes sense.
Excellent.
So, sorry, Johan.
I think he's frozen, but I think he would be encouraging you to move on to the next.
Yeah, sorry, I'm struggling
for you,
to see if I can re-hook up. I better talk quickly whilst I'm not going robot. So thanks very much, Sam.
Can I do a snippet on palate, even if it's only one thing?
Yeah, of course. Sorry.
Go mad, Sam. Go mad.
He's got
Good or not.
Go for it. We've got all night.
People talk about your taste buds. That's where you taste stuff. Nah, taste happens up here, and someone else will talk about that. But in your mouth, you're really only good for 5 or 6 things. Salt, not so important. Sugar, and you know what really sweet stuff tastes like. Acid, again, that really sour, gets your mouth watering. And tannin and umami, and who knows what umami is one of these mystery things. And I wanted to just talk a snippet about like this what is tannin thing. If you drink really strong black tea, bitter, nasty, drying, that's tannin. And you can imagine that tannin would come from the pips and the skins. Lots of people don't like tannic wine. Apparently most poisons are tannic. So when you're consuming something that's really tannic and bitter, your body's saying, what are you trying to do? Poison me. But there are some things we can do in the winery to make tannic things less tannic. One is we could...
You're stealing my material, mate.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
We
Go on, Sam.
Find
Ignore him.
protein. Sometimes we'll put a submersible pump in a tank, pouring carton after carton of skinny milk. That'll make it softer. Or egg white, or thyme in a barrel. Sorry, Adam.
No, you're good.
I like stealing your materials.
And everyone is loving the theatrics. You're getting a lot of credit for them in the comments. I'm going to be honest.
I've set a low bar. I've embarrassed myself.
I'm almost impressed with the winery. I thought it was a green screen.
No.
Computer needs a bit of grease, though.
We did have a couple of people ask, are there any grapes that have red juice that are used in Australia? Because there's a few grapes that were mentioned that do have red juice.
Yeah, so there are a couple of grapes that have red juice, and they're really uncommon. So, like most things, there's what are they? A couple of anomalies. Yeah.
And a whopping 86% of people said they prefer a dry rosé. This one question cannot get to any of you, but are there any naked sparkling rosés in the pipeline? Angel Martin would like to know.
Well, we have a couple of rosé proseccos in the pipeline. So I think that will classify as sparkling. So that's I think as close as we get at the moment. And actually, that's not true. We do have a sparkling rosé from the Hunter coming in for vintage 22.
Perfect.
Awesome. That was great, Sam. Thank you so much.
That was really good. Fantastic, Sam.
Yeah.
All right, and we will kick over to John Colvin from the Hunter. John's winery is Mont Valley. So, John, over to you.
Thank you, Johan, and as for everyone here tonight, thank you to all the angels out there who have supported us so well. And I've been involved with Naked now for 6 years, so it's been a wonderful journey. Well, I was born in Glasgow, actually. So there are not many vineyards anywhere close to Glasgow. And when I was 10, we came across to Adelaide, and there are lots of vineyards in Adelaide. And I think my interest in vineyards, and I'm a bit different to everybody else here tonight. I'm the guy who grows the grapes, and I hand the best grapes we can produce in a beautiful little part of the Hunter Valley in Mount View to Dan Binet, who's a winemaker. So Dan's a wonderful character who's got a mix of French and all sorts of things in his background. So I had in my DNA somewhere the need to do something with the soil. And it must have been, we must have looked at about 10 or a dozen plots of land up in the Hunter Valley over probably 5 or 6 years. And the local real estate guy, Alan Jerd, rang me up one day and said, I have got it. And so we went up and we actually bought 150 acres of absolutely beautiful land in Mount View, which is right over the hill from McWilliams Semillon vineyards, which produce, I'm told by those guys, maybe the world's second best Semillon on the planet. So we actually got a couple of senior winemakers from the Hunter came and tested the soil for us before we bought it, and they all said, you'll make really good grapes here. And so we bought it. And that was 23 years ago, and it's been an absolute passion of mine to build this wonderful place we've got up in the Hunter Valley since then. The view you can see behind me is actually our dam, which is the main dam that feeds the winery. And 18 months ago, it was totally empty. The first time in 23 years that we've been there, that the creeks had stopped running and all the dams were totally empty. We were, for the 2020 vintage, we were bringing in 8 truckloads of water every single week to keep them semi-alive. And within 12 months, the precise opposite came along, where we had the wettest quarter before Christmas that we'd had in the 20 years. And January and February were also very wet, and every single dam in the place is still overflowing today. So we've probably got enough water for many years. It's been a real family effort from us. My wife's involved, my daughter actually is involved in marketing the wine. Just before harvest, we send out an email to all the family, and my second son, who has an aversion to picking grapes, rings me back and says, Dad, sorry, but I've just got to go to Alaska for a couple of weeks, and I'll see you when I get back. So we actually get some interesting receptions from different parts of the family. We've got a little 18-hole par 3 golf course on the place, which we had a wonderful event a couple of years ago. We had the Naked Wines Mont Valley Golf Classic. And it's a very family-oriented event. The team up there, Chris Hunt and his family, have been working with us for about 20 years as well. His daughter's a great musician, so she plays and sings the guitar. The guy who mows the grass around the place runs a really terrific country band. So we have those guys playing. And Chris's wife is the chef at the best restaurant in the region, which came out of Roberts. So we had a really fabulous day a couple of years ago, and we're planning to do that again as soon as we can. So it's been a fantastic journey for all of us to be part of this amazing business of creating really good wine from the soil and the ecosystem that we live in. Just on the question of cellaring wine that I've been asked to talk about briefly, the fact is that almost 98% of wine is produced by the winemakers to be drunk pretty well straight away. So if you want to put some wine down, you need to be careful you're buying wine that's actually capable of lasting for 3 years or 5 years, or whatever. I've got quite a big cellar at our place up at the Hunter, and we actually have every single variety that we produced since 2002 when we got our first Semillon bottled. And it's a real thrill actually to sit there and taste a dozen different years of Semillons, which are of all the varieties that we produce, they actually get better and better with age. And our 2004 Semillon, which I think I've got about 30 bottles left, basically tastes like, you know, golden honey. It's just beautiful. So you do need to be buying wine that's capable to last a distance, and Semillon is an example of a variety where they are capable of lasting. Well, some of them up in the Hunters last for decades. So we know that ours that we produced 2 decades ago are still going well. It'll be interesting to see whether they still develop in the bottle. The actual cellar that we've built up there, one of the key things for cellaring wine is consistency of temperature. So the wine cellar is supposed to be 10 to 15 degrees, but probably more important is that the actual temperature variations are not significant. So depending on what you want to, where you want to put it, bear in mind it's a better idea to have somewhere where the temperatures are consistent rather than particularly cold at any one time and to get progressively warmer as the year progresses. The other one is darkness. Cellars need to be dark, and if there's a lot of light, particularly if you've got fluoros or something like that, they can actually affect badly the wine if they get too much direct sunlight or direct UV light like that. The other thing which I use a system called, it comes out of the Halliday virtual cellar. You can use a spreadsheet, but it's a good thing to actually have some kind of system that allows you to work out when you should drink the wine. I know when I had a cellar in the house I had in Sydney, I actually didn't do that, and in the end there were quite a lot of wines that had actually were trying to drink that had gone past the use-by date. So it's a good idea to have some kind of system that you can put the details of the wine, you just scan it, and it comes back straight away with, you should drink this wine within the next year or two. So that's a good thing to do as well. So they're the main tips I've learned over the years. Maybe the other winemakers on this call will have others as well, but that's probably enough from me. Johan?
Thank you, John.
Excellent. Thank you, John. That's great. I actually think that Hunter Semillon would be one of the best value wines in the world that you could sell. There's not many wines you can buy for, $15 to $25 for a, really decent wine and put it down quite safely for, 10, 15, 20 years. So yeah, that's a really wide cellaring tip for the Angels there.
we've had a few quite specific questions, which I think are really helpful for beginner wine aficionados who have the ability to withhold from drinking the wine. Tracy wants to know, how do you know if a wine's gone off without opening it or tasting it?
Well, I mean, the color is one thing. I mean, we don't have corks very much anymore. Actually, try to open an old Hunter Valley Claret a couple of weeks ago, and you could see, actually, just looking at the cork, that it was actually had gone past its use-by date. And sure enough, when we tried to open it, it basically disintegrated as I was trying to pull the cork out of it. And then when you had actually smelt the wine, you thought, yep, that's gone. So they're the, but if it's just Stilven, if they're screw caps, then it's probably the color. But I'll defer to my colleagues on the call tonight as to whether you've got better ideas than that.
I'm with you, John. I think colour's the clue, particularly with whites.
Total change of pace. We had a few people remark that Adrian and Rebecca look exactly like people imagine them from their label. And if that's not a nice segue into, I think you're next on the list, aren't you, Johan? Aren't they?
Absolutely. No, I read that too. Very cute. All right, Adrian and Rebecca, boy meets girl. Take it away.
Hello, angels. How are you? Obviously, I mean, take a look at that cartoon. If that's not spitting image, I don't know what is.
We actually sent a picture of ourselves to this cartoonist, so she did a good job, obviously.
Great job.
Yeah. Uncanny. Uncanny.
Well, I guess just to give you a little bit of background on us, our personal boy meets girl journey begins in 1999. Don't worry, I'll keep it short, where we met in a place called Griffith in New South Wales at what I can only really describe as a very dodgy excuse for a nightclub. During the day was what was it, like a Catholic club?
Yeah, it was a RSL club, just a leagues club type thing.
Yep, pokies and all that exciting stuff. By night they boarded up the windows and put some disco lights on and had DJ.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure Rob will be familiar with this place too.
Rob, you know this place. Pokies were still on, so they were kind of flashing away in the corner. And Adrian's friends knew my friends and they kind of introduced us. He was tall, I was tall. Obviously, it's the perfect pairing for any couple. So fast forward to 2012, before I fast forward to 2012. So we sort of met and we were working, Adrian was at uni at the time, but sort of started working at other wineries and had always wanted to make our own wines. So fast forward into 2012, Naked Wines in Australia, Naked Wines in the UK were looking to set up in Australia and got in contact with us. And yes.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to, get in there on the ground floor and be there from day one in Australia. And that, certainly, we started off with absolutely nothing. We were just working in the wine industry.
And loved it, had a passion for it, loved wine. So, we no vineyards, no winery, just a love and passion for wine. And
so Naked Wines has allowed us to start on that path of having our own not only wine brand, but we've collected a bit of equipment on the way through. And
we started off, with 2 ton of Pinot, our first vintage, and a tank and a wine barrel, and have since.
Now we've got pretty much all the equipment that we need. We lease a bit of space from a larger winery, we're slowly saving to have our own vineyard and one day. So we're on that path, which is a path that I thought before pre-Naked Wines that we'd never sort of head down. So
or ever achieve, or at least in 50 to 100 years.
Anyway, might talk about our blends.
So I'm going to stick that right there. Cabernet Merlot. I think some of you might be sipping on this one tonight. 2020 Boy Meets Girl Cabernet Merlot.
So
a lot of people are sipping on that one in the comments.
Hope you're enjoying it.
So sort of what Rob was also talking about earlier, even when you're making a single variety wine, you're going to have lots of different parcels of that same variety in the winery. And the end goal is to put those parcels together and make a nice complete wine. So you might have something that has a little bit of fresh acidity. You might have something that has a lovely palate. And it's basically the winemaker's job to put all those things together and make a nice complete wine, or a wine style that you're aiming to make in the first place, depending on your market. And a lot of single variety wines, they actually may be a blend as well. So while your label says it's a 2020 Shiraz, there might be up to 15% of another variety in there, because that's in Australia, we're allowed to add 15% of another variety to what is stated on the label, up to that, no more than that amount. So you might have a Shiraz from a certain region. It may have a little bit of, Grenache, may have a little bit of Cabernet, whatever the winemaker feels that makes that wine
full and complete, really.
And then obviously, then we move on to blends that are stated on the label, so such as this, which is Cabernet, Sauvignon, and Merlot.
And look, we do have a few blends in our sort of range of wines. We've got, the Cabernet, the Shiraz Cab. We quite enjoy working with blends and mixing up different exciting styles.
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons for that. So if you take Cabernet Sauvignon, for example, it has what is traditionally called a donut palate, and so you get a bit of flavour on the front and the sides of your tongue. It's lacking a little bit of mid palate weight, and something like Merlot can help fill that out. And that's a reason why you may blend something. The other reason is with our wines, when we blend something, there's always different percentages. So one vintage I may make a wine that has 85% Cabernet, 15% Merlot. Vintage later, just to sort of get the same result, it might be 60% Cabernet, 40% Merlot, and it just depends on vintage conditions and the quality of the fruit.
Yeah.
And we're trying to make a similar wine at the Boy Meets Girl level. We're trying to make an easy drinking, approachable wine every year, and we're going to try and make it look similar every year. And so all those different varieties and percentages, it gives us something to work with. So that's why I love blends, and also blends also give you the opportunity to work with a few different varieties. So even with an alternate variety that people don't know too much about, you can blend it with a more traditional variety, and that is an introduction to learning something about a different variety. So blends are
they're fun, and you get to be a little bit creative. And,
and look, one of my favourite wines to make is our Aeration Gentil. That's a sort of a take on an Alsatian wine, and it's a blend of a whole bunch of different aromatic white varieties. And just playing with that on the lab bench is lots of fun, because there's so many choices. It's sort of makes this lovely complex wine. But just looking at Gewürz and Riesling and all these different varieties, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but it's also fun. And so that's actually my favourite wine, and it's a massive blend of different varieties. And
it's getting pretty excited.
Great question here. It came through from Tracy. When you're blending reds, do you have the varietals maturing in separate barrels and then you blend before bottling, or do you blend in the barrels?
No, there's a few different ways, but basically what I do, you'll have a parcel that goes into barrels, and so there'll be, let's say there's 20 barrels that have a certain parcel in there. There'll be another 20 barrels that have a different parcel. It might be fruit from a different vineyard or a different block within the same vineyard. We'll go taste through all those barrels, select the ones that we think are the ones that will work together, do a little bench trial in the lab, and then we'll blend that together. There may be stuff in tank as well. So there's
sometimes you co-ferment, but generally speaking, you kind of want to keep them separate so you can blend them up.
So it's always basically to try and keep everything separate to the last moment, so you get as many blending options as you can possibly need.
And JP wants to know, what about blending whites with reds?
Not so common, but it definitely gets done. Yeah, with Shiraz Viognier, you know,
happen to have a bottle here, FYI.
Yeah, look, it's something that works better if you co-ferment it. So you put the red and the white, and it's a tiniest percentage. Tiny amount.
So Viognier in that particular blend is tiny, and all it does is bring an almost aromatic sort of floral lift to the nose and just kind of finishes on the palate. But it's minuscule, the amount of Viognier we have.
So I'd say somewhere between 1% and 5%, depending on the year. So that usually gets thrown into the fermenter, so ferments all together. Some people might actually add a little bit of Viognier as wine right at the end. Probably doesn't have quite the same result, but similar. Yeah, and I guess if you want to make a pretty poor man's rosé.
I was wondering how you were going to say that.
I'm exactly trying to say it in, I've got no better word than, I've got no better word. To make a rosé in an abominable fashion, you blend red wine with white wine. That's all I got. That's all I got.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Listen, we are definitely, let's go. We're definitely going to run over a little bit here, which I am super comfortable with. So we're just it's going to take as long as it takes, and I hope everyone's having a good night. And we got two more wonderful one winemaking duo and winemaker to hear from. So we're just going to sit back and enjoy. And Adrian and Rebecca, thank you very much for that blending session. I'm sure you have some robust, cute conversations on the blending bench there. On what to,
nice way of putting it,
yeah.
The blending bench.
All right, excellent. We are going to go to WA, Brian Fletcher, who some of you would be very familiar with. Brian's going to tell us about himself, but also talk a little bit about demystifying wine talk and jargon. So yeah, Brian, over to you.
Brian, you're on mute. Here goes. He's going to click off.
Sorry. Yep. Okay. Just for everybody, we do have a sparkling rosé, Prosecco.
Thank you, Brian. I was wondering if you were going to pipe up earlier.
Yeah, no, just leave it. You know, just everybody has their space. It's the important thing. Very erudite bunch here tonight, and I feel sort of a bit humble, frankly. I met Sam in a lift in Sydney in Potts Point when the original Naked thing started, and Adrian and Rebecca. I think 2012 actually. And I was, I think, the oldest person there, and I had to sort of invoke a sort of Hemingway-esque sort of attitude to the whole thing. And I got through it okay. My background, I grew up in Newcastle. Dad was a butcher, mum was a cashier, went to uni, did all that stuff. Built a place called Petlin with a guy called Brian Crozer back in the late 70s. Went to Seppelts. I worked there in Great Western, ended up being responsible for when we merged with Penfolds as the group white winemaker, and then something overtook me. I got bitten by a tsetse fly or something, and I went to make Pinot Noir in the Yarra Valley at St Hubert's. Stayed there a while, went to Evans and Tate as chief winemaker, and then after 8 years there, I went to Italy, southern Italy and Sicilia, and North Africa, Tunisia and Puglia. Made all sorts of wines there, Carignano in Puglia, and Negromaro and Primitivo in Puglia, Carterato and Nero d'Avola in Sicily, did a lot of that, and came back to Margaret River doing basically nothing. Yeah, well, anyway, that was around that time, 2012 or so, 2013, and I got cracking with Naked, and was very lucky. Actually, luck plays a lot of things in life, and I was, I'd really always been in my career sort of a technician. You know, I suppose there are all sorts of different winemakers, and I was, or am still in a way, a technician. And Naked has provided the connection, you know, to people, and that's the crucial thing. It's way to market, and that's been a fantastic thing. And I think that's reflected in what everybody said tonight. It's amazing it's an amazing sort of sales, whatever you want to call it, but it's the only thing I know where people can talk directly with winemakers. They can actually engage and interact with winemakers, and have Sam show them, like Starman, that movie with 2 balls in his hand, you know, like that. It's very good, and so on. They have Michael Caine glasses you got there, Sam, actually. They're sort of very Harry Palmer, I think, actually. We've got a Margaret River Shiraz tonight, quite dark and well, a little earthy and spicy. The Shiraz is an interesting wine in terms of people, you could call it the workhorse of Australia, as you could Chardonnay, as you could probably SSBs, and so on and so on. One thing Shiraz does, it tends to, or does show, at least to winemakers, and I think to the public, that it's quite reactive to different climates. And the Barossa and McLaren Vale is quite different to Heathcote, and so on and so on. Sunbury, whatever. Margaret River has its own particular style, and I have to say it's been a challenge to get it right, to make it into something which, you know, having some sort of interesting regional characters is one thing, but to get it into a form which has let's say an identifiable character on one hand, yet is, you know, is pleasing to people on the other, has been quite a challenge, and we've worked on that, and I think we're going pretty well. We've got semi-dryland vineyards and so on to do so. I did have some notes put up, but that, in light of what's gone on before me, it's rather academic, because I was going to screen share some stuff, but I can't. That doesn't matter. That's fine. In terms of wine colours, which I was going to talk about, I think colours as such can tell you a terrible lot about a wine. I'll put it this way: with a white wine in general, in very simple terms, you could say green is good, brown is bad, and wines naturally go through a procession or changes of colour for various reasons. Some white wines, I'm talking white wines here, that can be quite pale, with almost no colour. Sauvignon Blancs, for example. Other varieties have more, and so on. Some, to the extreme, can almost be reddish, like Traminer and Pinot Grigio and so on. But in general, let's say green is an attractive colour, which should indicate to you that the wine is fresh and young. As it turns or changes colour to straw or lemon and so on, that can tell you a lot, even before you taste it. There is some expectation in general. There will always be exceptions, but in general, there's a progression of colours from, say, green to straw to yellow, and then the no-no right at the other end is brown. When a wine is dark yellow or brown, really, usually, with some exceptions, you can expect that there will be issues. The other thing it might tell you is that if it's got a nice fresh colour, it will have nice fresh flavours. As it changes colour, you'll see interesting and resolution of those things into more complexity, into bouquet. Semillon, as was mentioned earlier, would be a great example of that, and where that lies on the spectrum of age can be anything. And one thing I must say these days with screw caps, wines don't sort of really just die. They more or less just fade away, but it takes a very, very long time. I remember seeing some early screw cap experiments in 1985 from wines made in 1976, which we found in Great Western in the drives. And we were amazed, being so used to corks, we were amazed by how fresh they were or how they hadn't oxidized. So one of the key technological changes with Australian winemaking has been really the advent of screw caps, which have just transformed the presentation of wines, not simply from spoilage or mold or whatever in the corks, but simply in their ability to hang on for quite some time. In reds, similar story. Colour density and hue are two things that are important. Young wines usually should have a good vibrant colour, which again changes naturally in reds from violet colours or violet hues to reddish colours, and then deep reds and brick reds and brown when they get quite old. I really can't say more than that. Lastly, quickly, I said something. I've been asked to talk about demystifying the vocabulary of wines. Well, I think the easiest thing to do there is to just keep it simple. Use plain English. And if people are talking to you and using words, ask them to explain what they mean. And that can often not so much put them on the spot, but you'll tend to see people, if they're asked to explain something, will try and deconstruct it down to, to the simple things. And I mean, if somebody says it's what is body in a wine, well, full-bodied or light-bodied is fairly self-explanatory. Legs, a racehorse has got good legs, it means persistence. The flavour stays with you. Or creamy, for example. Nonna's pasta is creamy. Well, creamy has a certain mouthfeel and so on. So, but the main thing about that, don't get tied up in jargon. Avoid it because it's no use to anybody. And unfortunately, sometimes the wine industry is filled with jargon, and it's a danger. But if you keep it simple and people talk about things, if you break it down to the simplest forms, then you'll actually get a lot more out of it. That's how I see it. And after all these years, I really just see that. And tasting these days, I still do quite a lot of it. Obviously, we tend to break it down into simple words, and simple words just work. That's all you need to do. And if you're with another winemaker, you should be able to have an instantaneous connection if they know what they're doing, as it were, and be able to communicate on a simple level with simple words. That's all it is ever. So I can't say anything else. I'm giving up valuable time to the last people on here, and I've said quite enough.
That's fantastic. We have a question that I think will really sort of maybe not unite us, but we'll all definitely have an opinion on, and that is Shiraz from different regions in Australia. And I think it's a really interesting question because, Shiraz is such a versatile grape. And if you would, Brian, for example, your Moat River Shiraz, put it up against a big Barossa Shiraz or John's Hunter Shiraz, it's a really versatile grape, isn't it?
Well, one of the great varieties or the great styles, you hardly ever see them ever, is Lower Hunter Shiraz. It's very rare actually these days. And of course I grew up on that coming from Newcastle. My brother was an engineer, civil engineer. He used to come from the council up there and he used to come home with lots of bottles because they'd probably give him a dozen bottles if he bulldozed a road somewhere for them. That's how it was in those days. Yeah, of course, that's what I'm saying. A Barossa is sweet fruited, creamy, I suppose is the best way to put it, and, with certain amounts of power. Whereas I said, Margaret River Shiraz tends to be medium-bodied and quite spicy, has a bit of Rhone-like characters about it, a little bit metallic, but of interest and usually more acidic, but quite a different style. So they are quite indicative of the areas, and you can sort of pick them if you that way obsessed.
I think this ties in really nicely to go over to Amy and Adam. I mean, Amy and Adam, you make Shiraz from several. Can pick up.
Sorry, mate, you just dropped out there.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, you make Shiraz.
There's my internet. You make Shiraz from several different regions in South Australia. So I'm sure you can talk at length about this topic, but I'd love your opinion, and then maybe we can go into your story and explaining the role of tannin, aging, etc.
Oh, look, I think Shiraz dovetails well into most of these conversations that we're having tonight. It is versatile. It does show big differences: cool climate, warm climate. Even within the regions of South Australia where we make Shiraz, we see vast differences. Largely around altitude, I think. I guess Clare Valley is, it's a continental climate. McLaren Vale being more maritime. Clare higher altitude. So we really do test the variety. despite the fact that all those regions, those three regions, the basis of those are the same geological structures. The ability for Shiraz to showcase and tell a story of a place is really quite unique. I agree. I think it's actually it's a topic for a different night. It's a whole other topic, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't done my preparation. But yeah, I just think that's a great topic for us all to get in the same room again in another month, and
people should experiment with them and just try different ones and see what they like and see what they don't like and find some differences for themselves.
Yeah, and I think to Brian, someone who clearly has an extensive resume and has been tasting wine for a long time, to say just keep it simple, and that's we mirror that. Keep it simple. Don't be afraid to pull a cork. If you think the bottle's off, pull the cork. If it tastes bad, tip it out. If it tastes good, drink it. It's pretty simple, and we can overcomplicate it. And by complicating it, and it makes it. I guess the fact that it has a fairly high kind of as a product, wine has what's the word? It's a kind of social equity. When you put it on a table, people want to know where it is, what it is, why you brought it to dinner. Forget the shit. Just drink it, share it, break bread. It's a beautiful thing. So anyway,
that kind of ties in with Tracy's question there about rabbit and spaghetti. So that's where the name came from. Basically, it's a story about breaking bread, sharing meals, sharing things, and sharing stories, and keeping it simple, because wine is more about the experiences we have around it than just the drink. The sentimental part of us, I guess, likes the idea that we may have made someone's day a little bit better when they came home and had a glass of wine. It's that simple.
And some of the best wines I've had, I've been drunk out of tumblers in Italy, half water, with great people. And it's not about the wine; it's about the people. And so we do in this. I think in the rich West, we do tend to make a habit of elevating wine to a position in society which some may question whether you've been there or not. But either way, we make it, we love it, and it's what we do. So I'm not here to devalue it.
The story's on the back of every bottle of rabbit and spaghetti wine too, if you want to have a read of it. But I'll leave Adam to tell you what it's all about, because I've got to go and get our daughter, or she's going to be left in a car park at gymnastics on her own. So thanks for having me. I'll leave you with Adam. Bye.
The story's on every bottle of the wine, so I'm not going to retell it. Spin it around, have a look. Any questions, hit me up on the website. But a little bit of background, like I said, I'm not going to try and take Brian on head-to-head in terms of CV. He's clearly older, wiser, and more accomplished than I am. But Amy and I both had jobs and careers in wine prior to this. We found ourselves in Perth. We bought a house. The property market went crazy. We made a little bit of equity, and we thought, what could we do? Let's just borrow against that, because surely a vineyard in the Clare Valley is a good investment. So we did that, and then thought, shit, I can't afford babysitters, so we better move back home, closer to babysitters. Living on the vineyard, GFC hit, and that sort of sped up our plans to start processing and making our own wine. So fast forward to 2012, we, I guess, Amy and I partnered with Naked Wines for the first time and created Rabbit Spaghetti. So I guess I had planned to tell the Rabbit Spaghetti story and talk about humanity and all that stuff, but we've already done that. So I guess before we get to the meat of the topic, which is a great one to finish with, which is tannins and phenolic chemistry, I'd just like to thank everyone, all the angels, for tuning in. Hopefully as winemakers and producers, we've all given back a little bit tonight, because it really does blow our minds every time I read that someone has shared one of our wines, at a birthday, wedding, funeral. It is really kind of, it's pretty crazy stuff that, a bit of squash grape juice from Clare, is impacting people's lives that much. And, thanks to the Naked model, we hear that and we see that, which is great. But on to tannins, and being mindful that, winemakers are really good at trying to create environments in which they appear more knowledgeable than they really are. And you never know when there's a phenolic chemist in the room. So I'm going to keep this really simple. So I'm choosing to focus here on what tannins mean to the taster and how they affect the tasting experience rather than chemical structures. But, tannin is a broad term for a group of chemical compounds that are found predominantly in grape skins, seeds, stalks, and I guess in barrels that are used for aging some wines. These are the compounds that are responsible for mouthfeel, astringency, and by that I mean the drying feeling that you notice in your mouth after tasting wine that increases salivation. And I guess together, along with other components, mainly acid, they contribute to what you might hear winemakers call a wine structure, which is really just fancy speak for the skeleton of the wine, off of which hopefully the plush, fruity, nice bits sort of hang. But it's the bones of the wine. And I guess you see this also. You'll see similar sort of sensory reactions when I guess with a cup of black tea. Isn't that right, Sam? So I guess this protein tannin reaction in the why they're drying is because there's a group of compounds. As a group of compounds, they react readily with proteins in the mouth, and thus drying it out. And I guess it's just, again, back to the milk, Sam, in the glass and the fining. I guess this protein tannin reaction is also why winemakers can sort of choose to add proteins to their wine in order to remove tannins. And they do that, I guess, when they need to, is an attempt to try and soften the wine. But again, I think that's another story, another lesson for another day. But just to try and weed out what mouthfeel and astringency is compared to taste and flavour. Some common words that you will hear used to describe the effect of tannins might be soft, round, velvety, silky, drying, grainy, gravelly, harsh, robust, aggressive, all describing a textural sensation in the mouth as opposed to flavours themselves. Interestingly enough, you'll all be familiar because of Sam's experiment earlier with red grapes versus white grapes. Red grapes tend to be higher in tannin. Again, because they are fermented on skins and generally matured in or on oak. So varieties with thicker skins tend to have a higher tannin content. Think of Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec, Shiraz, Mataro, Durif. And I guess it's also interesting as winemakers will, to have tannin is one thing, but winemakers will also talk to the ripeness of tannins. And in explaining this, it's useful to think of any other fruit that you're familiar with. It exists on a spectrum from sort of green to overripe. So green tannins or unripe tannins will leave this kind of furry, harsh, green banana type sensation in the mouth, where ripe tannins tend to be sort of soft and supple. And interestingly enough, just sort of dovetailing back into Rob's presentation about cool versus warm climate, this can also talk to where a wine is from. So if a wine shows green or unripe tannins, it's highly likely it's from a colder climate or a cooler vintage, or from the cooler side of the hill as opposed to the warmer side of the hill. What you do know is that the fruit has probably struggled to ripen and either just got there or not quite. And that tells a story of time, place, and vintage. which is I guess what the game's all about, is, you know, telling a story of a place. I guess in the bottle, I'm trying to speed this up a bit because a lot of this stuff is pretty dry. No pun intended. In the bottle, tannins tend to they react slowly with oxygen in themselves over time, and so this is, you know, generally observed in the wine becoming softer if you sell a wine, which is why, you know, to some degree, a reason why people sell wines, and wines that are high in tannin content tend to sell for longer. So I guess it's this reaction that can sometimes cause a perfectly natural sediment in the bottle, and I see comments from time to time coming in on the website about, oh, this has got, you know, some crunchy bits in it, and I guess, you know, that is purely natural. These compounds form longer and longer and longer chains to a point at which they sort of become insoluble, and they eventually fall out of solution and form a crust in the bottle of the wine, in the bottom of the bottle. And I guess this leads me to the next part of which I've been asked to speak about, which is decanters. Why do you decant wine? Number one, decanters just look really cool. It's just like this awesome piece of blown glass or crystal, and, you know, why wouldn't you want that on your table? That said, I've seen some pretty creative vessels used as decanters in the past, but really, you know, being completely honest and trying to demystify it, you know, a good litre beer jug is as good as anything that I've ever used, and you know, it can be as pretentious as you want it to be. It's really about function. In older wines, in particular, decanter, I think it's probably the most important role decanter plays. It separates the clear wine from any of the sediment, which gets stuck in your teeth and is sort of largely sort of problematic and unattractive. But this is, you know, and I think it's, you know, it really is, you know, number one in my opinion. The next one is aeration. You know, in the bottle of wine, in the bottle, the wine is sort of, it's in a state of, I guess, suspended animation, or to be more accurate, probably slow evolution, where decanting allows a wine to breathe, for lack of a better word, which is really incorporating oxygen into the wine, which I guess accelerates the evolution of the wine's aromas and flavours. You know, and like I said, this can be done a number of ways. It doesn't have to be done by candlelight, you know, as, you know, you see in old texts and movies. You know, we've got electricity these days, so, you know, we're quite adept at picking crunchy from smooth. So, you know, I do have a decanter here. I'm going to make a very rudimentary demonstration. To be honest, it's largely tipping wine from a bottle to another vessel, but really you're trying to get a passage of light through the shoulder of the wine, trying to keep an eye out for any solids, which are more likely to appear at the bottom end. I'm just trying to make sure I don't spill this all over my keyboard.
Now you poured that, does that mean, like, will that not last over, like, once that's been poured into the decanter? Like, must it be drunk in its entirety tonight?
It will speed up the evolution of the wine, but look, it's really about ceremony. I'll be honest with you. Like, you can do this, and it's great to have a bit of glassware to do this with. It sort of it justifies that Christmas present that you were given. But, you know, you can just as easily, you know, tip it into a glass, tip it to another glass. You know, it's really about trying to get some air into it and to open it up and to, you know, help the flavours evolve out of the wine. So it's not, yes, it'll bring the wine forward. That's the intention of it. But, you know, invite an extra person for dinner if that's a worry, I guess.
Or no judgment here, but Angel Tracy wanted to know, is there a rule of thumb about how long that you should have it in the decanter for? And
it depends on the wines. It really depends on the wine. Like, a lot of the stuff that, you know, that is finding its way to market, by all means, as young wines, like big robust Shiraz from the regions where we're making wine, you know, you can't treat it rough enough. I'll be honest with you. You know, at 18 months of age, you know, give it a good splash, shake it around. You know, you can really, you know, you don't need to be shy with it. You know, this is, you know, it's not all breakable. You know, it's you know, it's quite robust. So, you know, where an older wine, I've seen wines, you know, 20, 30, 40-year-old wines that have been decanted that tend to, you know, wow, I've got crazy stuff going on with my...
Brian's just gone ballistic with his screen share.
Cheers, Brian. Yeah, I've seen really old wines which have a really small window. They'll you decant them, they open, they flower, they die, you know, because they're just so fragile and they're so far along that evolution curve already that the decanter really just, you know, just pushes them over the edge.
So, Adam, a few angels have opened all 6 bottles that we talked about tonight. What's the best way that they can store those bottles if they feel they need to?
Oh, look, underwater if you read the recent press. Look, I guess if you don't have a bona fide cellar or wine fridge, you know, a cupboard in the centre of the house that has the most constant temperature, you know, through summer and winter is what I've always had to do as a student. But yeah, I think consistency of temperature, you know, between ideally sort of, you know, 16 to 22 degrees, I think, is what is touted. But I think the reality is a lot of the wines that are brought to market and sold today aren't built to live 20, 30, 40 years anyway. So I guess if you don't have that kind of journey in mind, I guess the quality of cellar and conditions is less important. But if you're spending money on a serious cellar and spending wines that are truly collectible, you know, then it's much more important.
What if you're just starting out? Like Tracy, Angel wanted to know, is there a certain varietal that's easier to cellar, like a bit more forgiving?
Look, I would pick bottles that stack neatly. But again, wines that are bigger and stronger with I guess higher tannin content will be less forgiving. Sorry, more forgiving. You know, they won't, but then they're not as fragile. So you can, I guess that they'll sell longer. But I guess the important thing with wine is if you're going to cellar it, it's not, you don't go from start to finish. It's a journey, you know. Well, that doesn't make sense, but you do go from start to finish, and it is a journey. So, you know, buy a dozen, buy 6, you know, pull a cork every 3 years. You know, get to 9 years of age and think, this is just rocket hot. I love this wine. You know, drink the rest of them and leave one. You know, that last one will tell a story. And then, you know, you've got the journey of the wine, and that's what wine's about. You know, and it's the same. Don't be afraid to get it wrong.
Well said.
You know, your good tasting experiences are framed by your bad ones. You know, it's only a bottle of wine. If you pull a cork and say, "Oh, look, I think it could have gone longer," well, you wouldn't have known that unless you pulled the cork.
Well said. I know we have gone massively over time, so I totally apologise to everyone. You've all stuck around the whole way through. We have a few questions for the group. Thank you very much for that, Adam. I feel like I've gone through a science degree as well as made.
I'm sorry about that.
No, in a good way. I can't wait. We have a few questions for everybody. Is there a wine jargon term that you guys all loathe hearing or having your wines described as? Nothing. They like it all. Okay, what about
anything that's while I've got this talking stick, anything that's wrong.
Anything that's wrong. Yuck would always be.
People who say it was too sweet when I know it's bone dry. Say it's too dry when I know it's sweet. I just bite my tongue.
Rob, you were
Until
voted,
now, so.
you were voted in the poll to be the biggest party animal, so you might want to take this one. But a few people asked about like what wines would someone new to wine, like a younger person, like to drink, to try, or what could you suggest someone who's starting out with wine to get to try?
Oh, well, firstly, just on that poll, I mean, I did have a look at that, and only 4% voted for Adrian. So, like, that is completely false. If you wind back the clock to 1909, I think that would tell a very different story. So
his hair was bleached.
Yeah, and there was a carpet dance floor. There was a carpet dance floor in that dodgy nightclub too. And Adrian used to tear that up. No worries. So I'll just leave that there. I'll just leave that there.
Rob.
And now, which wines for more newbies? So,
Or Mr. 70s.
Yeah, look, it's where to start. I mean, it's I guess often for people that are new to wine, often wines with a little bit of sweetness on it can I just sort of buffer them and just sort of be a good entry level